Hello everyone and welcome to our TAMS grant webinar here this evening. We're mainly focusing on robotic milking and a new 60% slurry storage scheme that was announced there in January 2025. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is John Breslin. I'm part of the yard design team with the Lely Center Mullingar. So my role is, after the salesperson has visited your yard, I'm next to call in. I have a look at the existing infrastructure that's there, the current layout of the yard, have maybe a conversation with the farmer to see where he actually sees the farm going in the next 5 to 10 years. Have a look and see, is any of the infrastructure that's there suitable for robotic milking? In some cases maybe the farmer might even go for a new greenfield build. I take a few measurements, go back to the drawing board and come up with 1 to 2 options that I feel would work well in that particular yard. Call back to the farmer with the 2 plans. We might sit down then at the kitchen table or something like that, have a look at them and hopefully agree on one of the options. At that point then, I then hand the plan over to one of our project managers. So what happens there then is that the project manager would look after the project right from the very beginning up until the first cow is milked. So project manager would look after the like of your shed man, the concrete man, plumber, electrician, who's supplying your bulk tank, and all the different bits and pieces that come along with it. So the reason for this is just to allow you a smooth transition, I suppose, to robotic milking. So moving on then, I suppose this evening we're going to just have a look at the dairy equipment scheme under TAMS 3, some of the terms and conditions of it. I'm going to move on then to a couple of different scenarios I'm seeing out in farm, be it farm partnerships, farm companies, general applicants, young farmers, female farmers, and then at the very end to finish up we're just going to go through the 60% slurry storage scheme, give you an example on it, and we'll have a live Q&A then at the very end. So we're just going to have a look here, I suppose, at the terms and conditions of the dairy equipment scheme under TAMS 3. So the first point to note there is that there's a maximum of 120 cows for any milking machine investment the year before you make your application, and actually on the day you make your application as well. So let's just say, for example, I was milking 130 cows last year in 2024. Because I was over the threshold of 120 cows, that would make me not eligible for any grant application on any milking machine investment. Another example could be where I was milking maybe 60 cows last year. Because I'm under the threshold of 120 cows, I am eligible to make a grant application on any milking machine investment. There's great scope there for anyone involved in a farm partnership or a young farmer. This threshold raises to 160 cows, so great scope for anyone involved in either of them scenarios there. One thing under the TAMS 3 dairy equipment scheme is that you can only get a grant on one milking robot. I suppose anyone that is over the 120 cow threshold, you may not be eligible for the like of a robot or any milking machine investment, but you still could get a grant on the like of a drafting gate and collars, meal bin, bulk tank, robotic scraper, whatever it may be. So I suppose one of the things just to keep in mind when you are making your grant application is that you must have 10% extra slurry storage before you make your grant application. So what that is the stock numbers that you already have, you must have 10% extra storage above what you would already need for your current stock numbers. So just something to have a conversation with your advisor about. So just moving on to this slide here, it's I suppose robotic milking TAMS 3, the reference costs. So what I have done is I have outlined all the items that are needed for a functioning robotic milking system, I suppose, on farm. Now oftentimes what I kind of see on farm is that some people get confused between the actual reference cost and the cost of the actual machine or the item. So just to give you an idea that the reference cost is the basis for determining the grant amount that can be given to the farmer under TAMS 3. So the reference cost is regulated by the Department of Agriculture, and these are the actual values that they have come up with for each of the items. So take the Lely Astronaut A5 there. It has a reference cost of €109,250. The Grazeway or drafting gate, just with the picture on the right hand side of your screen there, it has a reference cost of 12,500. The collars there have a reference cost of up to €112.50, and under the TAMS tree you can get a maximum of up to 120 collars. The base station then, which communicates with the collars and picks up all the information from the collars, has a reference cost of €2,833. So before we move on any further and get into a few of the scenarios, I suppose I just want to give you an idea on the different amounts that people are eligible for under the TAMS tree dairy equipment scheme, particularly focusing on a robotic milking system here. So a general applicant is eligible for up to 36,000. So you're probably wondering, where does that 36,000 come out of? So the general applicant's investment ceiling is €90,000. Okay, so the general applicant will get is 40% of 90,000, which is €36,000. The same for the young farmer. Their investment ceiling is 90,000 as well, but they have the advantage where they can get 60%. So 60% of the 90,000 is €54,000. One thing to remember is that you are only a young farmer for 5 years, okay, and up to the age of 41. So that's one thing just to keep in mind for anyone thinking of making any investments under TAMS 3. Very similar there to the female farmer as well, up to €54,000 available. So what that is the same as the young farmer. 60% of 90,000, which is €54,000. And in a partnership with any of the three parties involved on the screen there, be it a general applicant and a young farmer, or a general applicant and a female farmer, there's up to €71,000 available in a partnership for a robotic milking system. So moving on to scenario 1 here, the first one is the registered farm partnership. Seeing this a good bit when I'm out visiting on farms. Generally you have where there's a general applicant that can claim 40% and a young farmer or a female farmer that can claim up to 60% involved. So the main thing to remember here is that their investment ceiling goes to €160,000. So if we just go down through the different items here, the Lely Astronaut A5, they will get a grant of €61,600. The Grayswick, they will get a grant of up to €5,000, and 70 collars on the base station will get them a grant of €4,276. So all in all, into the farmer's pocket, they will get €71,000 of a grant on the robotic milking system. So they will have €132,000 of their investment ceiling used. So when you take away the €132,000 from the €160,000 of an investment ceiling, you will have just shy of €28,000 remaining of a reference cost, and that remaining €28,000 can be used at a grant of 40%. So in scenario 2 then, we're going to cover the young farmer or the female farmer. So the main thing to remember here is that their investment ceiling has gone to 90,000. The reason for this is that a single applicant can only be eligible for an investment ceiling of up to €90,000. So this means that a young farmer or a female farmer can claim up to 60% of their investment ceiling. So if you take 60% of 90,000, you're getting €54,000. A lot of money there for any young farmer or female farmer to go towards their project, whatever they decide to do. So just one of the things to be aware of for any of the female farmers out there is that to meet the criteria for TAMS 3 and to be eligible to claim down 60%, the female farmer must have completed the green certificate. Okay, that's one of the things to remember. The other thing is that if a female farmer was in a partnership or she was farming in her own right before 2022, she does not require the green cert. So that's one of the things just to check before you make any grant application, to ensure that both the female farmers meet the criteria for the female farmer to claim down the 60%. So moving on to scenario 3 then, this is a general applicant. So a general applicant is anyone that has been farming more than 5 years or is over the age of 41 years old. So the investment ceiling there goes to 90,000, same as the previous slide, but the big difference here is that the general applicant can only claim 40% of their investment ceiling, which is 90,000. So 40% of €90,000 will get you 36,000. So the thing just to remember there is, and we spoke about it earlier on in the webinar, that there's a maximum of 120 cows the year before you make any grant application for a general applicant. So that's really where the threshold of 120 cows kind of comes in there for the general applicant. Moving on to scenario 4 then, a very lucrative one if anyone is lucky enough to be in this position. Two young farmers, both young farmers can claim the 60%, so their investment ceiling is 160,000. So young farmer 1 would get 60%, young farmer 2 would get 60%. So on a Lely Astronaut A5, they will claim down a grant of €65,000 400. On the Greysway then, they will get a grant of €7,500. And then on the 70 collars in the base station, they will get a grant of €6,400. So all in all, they will get €80,000 into their pocket after they have drawn down all the grants. They'll have €132,000 of their investment ceiling used, and they'll have another 28,000 remaining at 60%. So in some of the previous slides you've seen where that remaining 28,000 could only be drawn down at 40%. Because there's two young farmers in a partnership here, the 28,000 can actually be drawn down at a 60% grant. So look at any young farmer out there that's in a partnership and is thinking about doing something, or if there's two young farmers in the partnership, it's definitely well worth your while looking into. A lot of money there to be drawn down if you're in that scenario. Again, if there's any young farmer and a female farmer involved in a partnership, very same figures as before. Their investment ceiling is still 160,000. The young farmer, once they're farming less than 5 years and are not over the age of 41, they will get 60%, and the female farmer will also get 60% as well. So what you have here is very same figures again for the Lely Astronaut, the Greysway and the 70 collars in the base station. Again, you will get up to €80,000 into your pocket. The total investment ceiling used then again is 132,000, and there's still €28,000 of a reference cost remaining at 60%. This reference cost could be put towards the like of a meal bin, robotic scraper, bulk tank, whatever you wish to put it towards, let's say maybe to finish out your project or whatever it may be. So moving on to scenario 6 here, we have two general applicants in a partnership. So the main thing to remember here is that both applicants are farming more than 5 years and are maybe over the age of 41, so they're both only eligible for 40%. So the partnership investment ceiling then goes to 160,000. So in a Lely Astronaut A5, they are eligible for 43,600. The Greysway, they're eligible for 5,000, and 70 collars in the base station, they'll be eligible for €4,276. So all in all, they will get just shy of €53,000 into their pocket when all is said and done, and if their grants drawn down. They'll still have another €28,000 of a reference cost remaining at 40%. So look at that reference cost, the 28,000 at 40% can be put towards, as I said before, robot scraper, bulk tank, meal bin, whatever you need to put towards your project to get it finished off. So look at 53,000, still an awful lot of money there for any general applicants in a partnership that are looking to draw down a grant on a robotic milking system. I suppose before I go any further, you're probably wondering throughout the different scenarios there why I've only used maybe 70 collars in the base station when in the beginning I mentioned that there was a maximum of up to 120 collars available. I suppose the reason I done that is that in our centre, as standard for, let's say, one robot, a Greysway for a grazing system, we are generally selling 70 collars on the base station. So what I was trying to do in these scenarios here is kind of making it as applicable to the field as I possibly could. So that'll just give you an idea of the reference cost available. So last but not least is our scenario 7, the farm companies. Definitely in the last number of years seen an awful lot more of these out and about when I'm visiting farms. I suppose the difference here is that in a farm company you're only eligible for 40% of 90,000, because there's a general applicant within the farm company. In some cases I have seen where there might be a young farmer involved in the company, and if that is the case, the company will be eligible to get 60% of €90,000. Now the main thing to remember there is that you must speak to like your accountant and your advisor to make sure that the farm company is actually registered as a young farmer company or a young farmer entity. So just getting back to the figures, I suppose the general applicant will get 40% of 90,000, which is €36,000, and if there's a young farmer involved in the company or a female farmer, it'll be 60% of 90,000, which is €54,000. So I suppose moving on to the 60% grant aid for nutrient storage investments. Great to see this scheme launched. I suppose it is badly needed. A lot of farmers out there need to invest in slurry storage, and it's good that the government announced this to kind of bring in a grant for this. I suppose the main thing I was surprised to see was that it's actually 60%. I thought maybe it might have been 40, but it's good to see that they've actually launched it, that it is 60%. So just to kind of give you some information on it, so €54,000 available for all farmers. So what this is 60% of 90,000. Anyone that is lucky enough to be involved in a registered farm partnership can get 60% of 160,000, which is €96,000. A lot of money. You could do a serious amount of slurry storage for that sort of a reference cost there. The main thing to remember within this is that it's a separate ring fence ceiling in TAMS 3, so similar to the like of less and solar, completely separate ceiling with a separate allocation put towards it. The investments include the like of your manure pits, mass concrete tanks, circular slurry stores and geomembrane line stores. So presently at the moment you do require to have planning permission for any slurry storage projects that you're thinking of going ahead with. So that is one thing just to keep in mind, that if you are thinking of doing any sort of slurry storage work or any slurry storage project, that you must have planning permission before you start. And to be eligible for the 60% slurry storage grant, every farmer must have the minimum legal requirement of slurry storage on their farms currently. So one of the things there is that on farm you must have enough slurry storage for the actual stock numbers that you have at the moment before you can make an application for the slurry storage grant. So on screen here I've just added in, I suppose, a drawing of our typical head-to-head robot setup with a grazeway at the end of the tank and our 5 separation cubicles. So I just put this in to kind of give you an idea of the dimensions of the tank and what the reference cost of it would be under the new 60% slurry storage grant. I suppose just to give you an idea in the drawing, so starting from the left of your screen you can see the cow at the feeding barrier. You have 5 separation cubicles. You then have robot number 1. Robot number 2 is then facing it in a head-to-head position. Moving across to the right hand side of the screen then we have our ABC grazeway, which segregates the cows to the 3 different paddocks. So this particular tank here is 105 foot long by 14 foot 6 wide, so there's a 14 foot 6 slat in it and it's 105 foot long. So just to give you an idea of the reference cost here, so the tank dimensions, as I said, 14 foot 6 slat, 105 foot long, it's 9 foot deep, so it'll be about 330 meters cubed of slurry storage here. That's including a 200mm of a freeboard. So when I put these dimensions into the TAMS calculator, it has given me a reference cost of €47,600 to do this particular tank. So when I put in the 47,600 and multiply it by the 60%, I'm getting €28,560. So that is the actual figure that the farmer would be getting back when all is finished. Slats on, tank ready to go, you would get €28,560 of a grant. So just moving on to this slide here on TAMS 3, I suppose the current tranche now is closing next Friday the 7th of March, so you won't find that coming around, folks. February is a very short month, as we all know, so Don't be afraid to get your TAMS applications in sooner rather than later. So it can take anywhere from 3 to 4 months to get TAMS approval. Here I've put in a bit of a timeline, so you can see there that, let's say I put in my TAMS application now on Friday the 7th of March. I'm probably not looking about getting any approval until July or August 2025. And when I would get that approval, I must have my project completed by January 2027. So that'll just kind of give you a timeline of how long some of these things can take to actually come true. I suppose we do have our own in-house advisor. They would be more than happy to talk to you or process an application for you if you need to get one done. We also have a good relationship with a lot of different advisors countrywide, and we can put you on to different people to help you process your application or if you have any questions. So don't be afraid to get in contact with us if you have any questions at all. So look, that's it for this evening, folks. I'd like to thank everyone very much for listening. I hope there was some good information for people there, particularly on the different scenarios. Look, we will be uploading this video to our website and maybe on our YouTube page. I suppose it just gives you the chance that you could actually go back and look at the video, maybe pause it on the actual scenario you want to look at to get a better idea of what you would actually be eligible for. So we're going to have a live Q&A now. Anyone with any questions, put into the chat function below and we'll answer them as best we can. So thanks everyone very much for listening.
Thanks very much for that, John.
Problem.
My name is William Conlon. I do work on the yard design side of things with Lely Kilkenny. So there's a few questions in, John, not too many, so we'll keep it quick. If anyone has any more, feel free to ask in the question and answer box. But I suppose a big one that comes up is internal agitation points and grants for robots. What's the story with it?
Yeah, look, I suppose it is one of the things that we come across an awful lot. Unfortunately, let's say if you do have a shed that has any internal agitation points under the TAMS tree, you can't install any equipment in there. Reason being that any equipment that is you go for a grant under TAMS tree, let's say, can't actually share the same airspace as any agitation points. So that is kind of one of the rules and terms and conditions under TAMS tree. No internal agitation points for any equipment that's being fitted.
Yeah, and what we see, I suppose, from a practical point of view, farmers either decide to, make the internal agitation points external by extending tanks, or they build a small separate unit for the robot in a different airspace to the shed that might have the internal agitation points. And those are really your two options. Or maybe the likes of an aeration system as well. They're getting a little bit more popular, and there is grant aid on them as well. Planning is planning required to put in a robot into an existing shed and to get a grant on it, John?
No, thankfully, look, there's no planning required. If you are going within an existing building, there's no planning required. But obviously, if you are looking to do maybe a shed extension or something like that, there is a planning required. So there is.
Yeah, I suppose it's important to note there as well that the planning might be required on the build, but to get a grant on an actual robot, even if it's in a greenfield build, you don't need planning to get a grant on a robot or a milking system. So it's just an important point to note, depending on the size of the build. Question here, I might answer it. If someone is on a 5-year lease and they're in year 3, can they get a grant on a robot? I suppose for the department, you have to have control of the asset for 5 years after you get paid. So if it was only 2 years left on the lease, you'd either have to potentially extend that lease to show that you will have control of the asset for 4 or 5 years. Now, if it was a practical point of view, if you're looking at putting a robot on a lease block, there's not a massive amount of work in taking out a robot, reinstalling it on a separate farm or on a home farm, say down the line. We would have a good lot of farmers that have milking through a parlour at home and decided to expand by putting a second robot, say, on an outside block or on a second unit. So there are options with moving robots, but to get a grant, you have to have control of the item or control of the asset for 5 years. So that is just something to note. One thing that we see, I suppose, when we're talking on grants, and a challenge with grants can be when it comes to drawing down finance. So a lot of the banks will require you to have a proof of a grant, a grant approval before you make your drawdown for your loan. So you could have the money there approved waiting to go, but you might not be able to access it until you have grant approved, which has, I suppose, held up a few jobs over the last 12 months. So it's just something to note. you know, the paperwork side of things does take a while. Siobhan was asking, I suppose, on the investment ceiling, individually it's 90,000, and then how come a partnership doesn't double up to 180? I suppose the reason is in TAMS 2, each applicant had an 80,000 euro ceiling a piece, which doubled up to 160. And when they brought out TAMS 3, instead of going 90,000 a piece, they still kept it at the 160, but the first applicant will get a grant on the first 90,000, and the second applicant will get a grant on 70,000. So it's just they decided to keep the same limit that they had in TAMS 2, unfortunately. Let's see what else is here. I suppose the age limit, John, for the female farmer to qualify for the 60% grant.
Yeah, I suppose the question that comes up now and again. All right, so look at anywhere between 18 and 67 years is kind of the limit. So 67 years is the limit there for any female farmer just be able to draw down the 60% grant.
Okay. We've one here, a 45-year-old farmer trying to take a lease on a local farm with 6-unit milking parlour. New herd number in the last few months. Am I considered a young farmer, and do I need a green cert? So unfortunately, as you're over 41, you're no longer seen as a young farmer. So you wouldn't be eligible for the 60% grant on a robot. You'd still get, as John went through, your 36,000 of a grant on the robot itself. And you separately then have a grant on Slurry storage, but if it's on a lease block, you're probably unlikely to go that route with it. So really, if you're by yourself and you're 45, as you've said, then it's only a 36,000 of a grant you would be eligible for on the robot. You're no longer seen as a young farmer, unfortunately. We'll often get a few questions about the reference costs for slatted tanks and for building work in general. Are they accurate? The one thing I would see that with the reference cost, there's talks of there being a review mid this year, but realistically that won't probably come into fruition then until early next year. So, you know, the reference costs that are there now are really the ones to work with. If you're waiting for them to change and go up, you know, you are waiting a while. That is the only thing. Another question here, will there be another application tranche in 2026? So there will. So the tranches for TAMS 3 work in 3 month tranches. So every 3 months, a new tranche will open. After 3 months, it will close, and all the applications that have come in the previous 3 months will be looked at. So that's just the way that the TAMS scheme works. For those that need slurry storage, the requirement to have sufficient slurry storage already is disappointing with the new grant. So yeah, so that the question there is, do you need to have sufficient storage already before you can get a grant on slurry storage? And unfortunately, that is the requirement. I suppose the reason for that is that the department can't grant aid someone to meet their minimum legal requirement. They have to be legally complicit before you can make grant application. I suppose that it's important maybe to note here that for the robot, you have to, or milking equipment in general, you have to have 10% extra storage. But for an investment and a grant on slurry storage, you only have to have the legal minimum requirement. So you don't have to have the 10% extra. So that's just an important, I suppose, point to differentiate on. Another question here, can robots be placed on an existing slatted tank? So if you're trying to get a grant on a robot, it can't sit on an open slat. What can be done is robots can be put on a plinth of concrete on top of a slat, and then a special sump fitted underneath to ensure that the cow is a meter away from an open slat when she's being milked. So if you're going for a grant on a robot, it can't sit on an open slat. If you're not going for a grant on a robot, then it can be placed on an open slat. So it just depends on the situation on the farm. But look, we do a lot of jobs retrofitting, and John, you can speak on this. We do a lot of jobs retrofitting into existing sheds, and very often you're working on existing slats.
Yeah, and look, like a majority of our work there at the moment actually is retrofits into existing sheds and things like that. So look, that's why we were kind of saying in the beginning there, I suppose we look at the farm, see what's suitable, where potentially they could fit in, and come up with a plan and go back and discuss it then. So look, at a lot of our work would be retrofits, but some new greenfield jobs as well.
Yeah, another question here, is there an end date for TAMS grants? the best of my knowledge, I think this TAMS 3 is due to run from 2024, when it started last year, to 27. I think is the current dates for it, but I can double check that again. But it is going for another couple of years. Look, like what happened with TAMS 2, when TAMS 2 closed, a new grant came out and with TAMS 3, so you would hope that that would continue on. There seems to be more and more grants being put towards, you know, automation and things like that. So that is a hope, but you never really know. You know, terms and conditions and rules can change. So as you saw with John's timeline there, any grant that goes in now, you know, it's going to take 3-4 months to get approval. You then have 12 months to make the investment and claim it back, and you can potentially apply for a 6-month extension then on top of that. So any project that's applied for this, you know, today, you're really looking at 2 years of a time frame pretty much to put in that investment, which is positive. No, I think that's
it.
I think that's most of the questions. If anyone has any, you know, particular question relevant to their own setup, I suppose a big part of both myself and John's job is going out to farms, looking at individual farms, looking at individual scenarios, and guiding farmers on what is the best route to go, whether it be the build, whether it be the grant side of things. So feel free to reach out. Just one last question after coming in there. Do you need planning permission before grant application? So for milking equipment, the likes of a robot, you know, drafting gates, collars, you do not need planning permission to make a grant application for a robot, for collars, for drafting gate. You do need planning permission approved currently if you want to make a grant for, or if you want to make a grant application for slurry storage. There is talks of an exemption coming in. It doesn't seem to be likely. If it does come in, it doesn't seem likely before the back end. So I still think you're probably better off, if you are looking at going for slurry storage, you're better off applying for planning now. The downside with all of this is that your timelines on projects are probably a lot longer than people think. You know, if you go for planning in the morning, it's going to take 3 to 4 months without any issues before you can get full planning approved. Then you're putting another 3 to 4 months on top of that for a grant application, which really means it's going to be difficult enough to build any slurry storage by this back end of the year unless you've gone for planning already. So like myself and John will be out with a lot of farmers who are maybe looking at 18 months, 24 months away from doing a robot project. And really you need to start working on that project now if you want to get planning, if you want to get a grant on the slatted tank before going with a robot. So it is, the timing is something I suppose to, you know, we can't stress enough. Excuse me. Can you draw
down both schemes, robot and slurry storage, at the same time? So because they're two separate tranches within, let's say, or two separate ceilings, within TAMS 3, let's say, so one is under the dairy equipment scheme and the other is under, let's say, the nutrient storage investment scheme. So that is it'd be separate. So the main thing is to remember that you do have to have planning permission got before you can actually make your grant application on the slurry storage. But if you are thinking, if you had your planning got and you're going to make a grant application, there's no reason why you couldn't put in the 2 applications at the one time, provided you did your planning got.
Yeah, I think that's it. So look, like I said, if anyone has any individual questions, feel free to reach out to us in Lely Mullingar, Lely Kilkenny, and we can answer any question. You know, this is what we're dealing with every day of the week. So thanks very much for your attention, and we'll hopefully talk to somebody soon.
Thanks, everyone.